Good afternoon. Today's message is entitled Encountering God in the Cleft of the Rock. Our passage is from Exodus 33, verses 18 through 34, verses 8. Come with me. As we start, Moses is speaking to God. Then Moses said, "Now show me your glory." And the Lord said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." Then the Lord said, "There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." Let's skip ahead to verse 4. So Moses chiseled out two stone tablets like the first ones and went up Mount Sinai early in the morning as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried the two stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down in the mountain and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving the wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of their fathers to the third and fourth generation. Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshiped. All right, so for the sake of time, we're not going to go back and look at the first two encounters Moses has with God, but let's do a quick summary. In the first encounter Moses has with God is a burning bush in the wilderness, close to the same part of Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai region. During this encounter, God reveals to Moses who he is, that he is eternal, unchanging, and trustworthy, that he is faithful, that he gives promises, and he fulfills those promises to every generation. And that is enough for Moses's life to turn the trajectory of his life and begin to walk out the calling that God has for his life. He goes to Egypt. He helps bring the Israelites out of slavery, and they begin to make it through the wilderness back to the same region. And God calls Moses up Mount Sinai, also called Mount Horeb. And during 40 days and 40 night encounter with God, Moses is given the 10 Commandments, the beginning of the instruction of how it is when we are called by God, because we all are like Moses was, when we are called by God, how we are to live, so that we can live in harmony with him rather than separation from him. During this amazing encounter, God writes with himself, he himself carves stone tablets with the 10 Commandments. This is the beginning of where Moses gets the teaching from God that then comprises a lot of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the law of the Old Testament, during this 40-day encounter. While he is there encountering the living God and beginning to learn how to live, back in camp, the Israelites are not doing what they're supposed to do. They have already promised to serve Yahweh only. They have already promised to follow these commandments, to do these things. And when Moses comes down from the mountain, they are worshiping a golden calf. They have already, boom, knocked off commandment 1 and 2, fail, fail. They have sinned. They have separated themselves from God. And Moses, when he comes down and encounters that, is when he makes his mistake. He also sins. His frustration that they have turned from the God that they have promised to serve may be founded. It probably is founded. We are called to have righteous anger, righteous indignation, but he doesn't hold what God gave him holy and separate, and he doesn't hold enough value to what God gave him. So in his anger, he breaks the law. The Israelites have metaphorically broken the law. They have disobeyed it. He breaks the law in his anger, physically breaking it. So both Moses and the Israelites have sinned at this point. Moses deals with what's in camp and he goes back up the mountain to plead for God to not destroy them, to not leave them, to not abandon them, but for him to fulfill his promise, as he already revealed what he would do in the burning bush. The God who is faithful through generations, right? Gives promises, fulfills them. He went to plead with God to please be true to who you are. Fulfill your promise to these people in the next generations. Please, God. God answers his prayer, his intercession, right before we pick up. God says, yes, I will do what you have asked. You have found favor in my eyes. And then that's where we pick up, where Moses' immediate response to God's overwhelming forgiveness and grace and mercy to him and to the people around him who have also sinned. His immediate response is, oh God, show me your glory. There is more to you than I have seen and than I can understand. God, I want to know more of who you are. And so this is the beginning of his third encounter with God on this mountain. But when he comes up, as he says in verse 21, sorry, the numbers are small. The Lord said, there's a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will place you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I pass by. All right, what is a cleft in the rock? People my age and younger may not even use this terminology frequently. This mountain was a rocky mountain, not one with beautiful meadows and glades of grass and water brooks flowing down it. This was a rocky, barren, hard place of a mountain. And the cleft is a place where there was just enough ledge on the edge of somewhere to stand, perhaps for a mountain goat to get his footing as he's climbing up and down the rocks. Just enough place to have your feet be there without falling off, without having to cling on for dear life. You could stand. This is where Moses encounters God in this way, this deeper way, this way where God describes 13 attributes of his mercy. That's what that long passage of the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding love and faithfulness, all of those things. There are 13 attributes of mercy that are the definition of who God is. They are all his name. They are all his being. They are God. This is the place where God reveals a broader sense of who he is to Moses. When Moses is standing in this rocky, hard place where his footing is stable if he doesn't move, but if he starts to get restless and move around, he may lose his footing. This is where God reveals to him a deeper sense of who he is. And in our lives, that's true as well, right? When we first encounter God, we encounter him. It's like, oh, wow, Jesus, you really are the Messiah. You are who you say you are. And then he empowers us to begin to live life the way that he wants us to do, to fulfill his purpose in our life. And then as our experience with God progresses, we get to a point where God's like, okay, now it is time to start living the way that I intend you to live. Piece by piece, God begins to reveal areas in our life that is sin that we need to put behind us and begin to obey his ways. That's the second encounter. But this third encounter is the one that is revolutionary, just changes everything for us going forward the rest of our lives. But it is in the hard places that we experience God in this way, where we are not resting beside the peaceful streams that David mentions in Psalm 23. Those times with God are times where he restores our soul and he strengthens us and he gives us rest and peace. But these hard times in our life are when we learn who God really is. But like Moses, we have a choice to make. Moses was placed by God in that cleft in the rock. That's what it says. I will place you in the cleft in a rock. We are also placed in these hard places in our life. Sometimes it's actually a result of our sin, these hard places. And sometimes it is actually the blessing of God that he puts us there in these hard places so that he can reveal to us who he is. But like Moses, we have a choice. We can turn and face the rocks. We can study them. We can speak to everyone about us, the hardness that we are surrounded by on all sides. We can memorize every detail of the hard, dry, barren things in front of us. We can focus on our footing and the fact that we don't know what next step to take in life because nothing seems certain. We can look down and see the pitfalls, the places that we could fall and get injured in this season of life. We can focus on our surroundings, or we, like Moses, can turn and see the back of the hand of God that is holding us securely in that place. So we won't slip, we won't fall. We are safe in the hand of God. But even when we turn to God, we still need to choose what our perspective is going to be of God. When he turned in this area, it already described early in the passage that where we didn't read that there is fire on the mountain and there is lightning and God was speaking in thunder. It was this crazy, wild, terrifying storm to everyone who is not in the middle of it. Everyone looking on, it was just so fear inspiring. But Moses was safe in the midst of the storm. But when he turned, he saw God's hand sheltering him, protecting him from the light of his glory, protecting him from the raging fire, protecting him from the lightning, from the wind that perhaps was blowing around, protecting him. But what he saw was the darkness of God's hand. And so often in our lives, we turn away from our situations to begin to see God. And we ask, God, where are you? All I see is this darkness. I don't see you. God, where are you in the midst of this? But this is where, if we will silent ourselves before the living God who is there holding us safe and secure, we will hear him. We will hear him whispering to our hearts, to our spirits. You'll hear him teaching us the truth of who he is. This happens again in the Old Testament. Is it Elijah who's there? And there's fire and there's windstorm and all these other things that pass by. And God wasn't in those items, but it was the still small voice that he heard in that mountain. And he said, that is the voice of God. And he turned to it and he encountered God. That is what we need to do in our seasons of life as well, to quiet ourselves in the midst of that hard place, that hard season, and listen for God to speak over us who he is. Because once we understand who he is, then we understand who we are in relation to him. And then all of the hardness around us, the jagged edges that are behind us, the slippery rocks that are at our feet, they don't matter anymore in the midst of realizing I am secure in the presence of God. He is so close that him whispering to my heart is enough for me to be aware of his presence. He's not shouting from the other side of the canyon. He is right there whispering who he is. And like Moses, these 13 attributes of him are true for us as well. He is a God who is compassionate and gracious. He gives us grace. He is slow to anger. He abounds in steadfast love and faithfulness. He maintains his love through thousands. He forgives all types of sin, wickedness, rebellion, and missteps. He does all of that. And then he does not leave the guilty unpunished. That part is what Jesus did. We are all guilty, all have sinned, and all have fallen short of the glory of God. But he doesn't leave that unpunished. He took that sin upon himself in Jesus when Jesus died on the cross, and he paid the price for all of that sin. It is done, it is finished, because God is love and merciful and gracious and compassionate and faithful. He is all of those things. And if we accept him, then he will show those things to us. But he gives us a choice. We can choose to accept him or choose to turn away from him and back to life itself and just focus on these things. But the sin still has to be paid for at some point, one way or another. If we won't accept his offering of covering that sin, then that's when their children, The third and fourth generation are punished. It says, it is not that the children are guilty of their parents' sin, because it says in the Bible that you are guilty of only your own sin, but the consequences of your sin continue for generation to generation. How many families talk about that? Oh, it runs in my family. Alcoholism runs in my family, or these things run in my family. Those issues in life have not been turned over to God to seek his forgiveness and his healing from. And so that continues generation to generation. When Moses is in this cleft of the rock, and he turns away from the rock and toward God and realizes who God is, his only response is in verse 8. Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshiped. There is nothing he could say, nothing he could do but worship the amazing God who loves us this much. And in our own lives, this is our only response to understanding this is who God is. So Moses' first encounter, he learned who God is and recognized him as his God. His second encounter, he learned how to begin to obey God's commands, God's precepts, God's law, how to walk out the faith, the life of faith that we are called to walk. But this third encounter, after Moses messes up in life, and he realizes he needs a God to forgive him because he can't do it on his own. After that kind of encounter is when he begins to see the breadth and the depth of how much God loves him. And he is changed. When Moses comes down from the mountain, when Moses comes down from the mountain, let's skip ahead here, later in chapter 34 to verse 29. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of testimony in his hands, because God wrote them again, because he's a gracious God, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken to the Lord. The beauty, that light of God was so impactful on his life that everyone around him saw it. It was obvious he was in the presence of God. He wasn't even aware of it himself, but it changed who he was. It says he ended up having to put a veil over his face whenever he talked to people because it was so bright they just couldn't even look at the brightness of who God was and how God was beginning to transform him. And at this point is when the Israelites began to really try to listen to what Moses was saying that God was teaching them. They failed, they messed up a lot, they messed up frequently, just like we do. But this encounter with the living God that changed him took Moses from being a disciple to beginning to be a disciple maker. So the other people around him saw the transformation in his life and wanted to try to emulate that. They did it imperfectly, just like we do, but it changed him. And this is the same thing that happened in the New Testament with Jesus. People realized he was the Messiah. He began to teach them how they ought to live. And then their lives were changed, and they went and they told everyone about this amazing God. And God began to change them also. And so it is my prayer that each of us experience this kind of encounter with God, an encounter where we are in the cleft of the rock, not focusing on the hard parts of life around us, but using that season of our life to turn to the amazing God who loves us, who is shielding and protecting us in that season, who has placed us there so that we can put aside all distractions and focus in and hear him whispering to our hearts who he is and who he has made us to be, walking side by side with him, becoming a disciple through the rest of our lives and a disciple maker. Let's pray.